My story began in a small town surrounded by cozy houses. There was an atmosphere of warmth and closeness in our house. My mother, Jessica, was not only a parent for me, but also my best friend. We spent a lot of time together discussing life moments, dreams, and plans for the future. My brother, Mark, has always been a reliable support and protector in our family adventures. However, one day I found a stack of letters and documents on the shelf in the living room, which surprised me a lot. They revealed that my mother was hiding the truth from me about the debts that burdened our family. It hurt me to realize that she was carrying this burden on her shoulders without sharing her problems with me. Mom always seemed like such a strong and independent woman, and I never suspected that there were dark secrets in her life. The discovery of this truth has become a real test and challenge for me. It became clear to me that my task was to help her in this difficult situation, and I decided to take responsibility for myself, even if it meant big sacrifices and difficult decisions. Since I found out about my mother's debts, every month has become like a race against time. My life has turned into an endless cycle of paying bills and loans. Every month I had to allocate $2,000 to pay off my debts, and this became a huge burden on my shoulders. It was difficult for me to explain to my brother, Mark, why I was making such a decision. He believed that I was doing this only for the sake of the future inheritance, and often expressed his disagreement. But for me, it was more than just financial support for the family. It was an expression of my love and devotion to my mother, who was always there for me. With each passing month, the burden of debt became heavier, but I did not give up. Internally, I suffered from tension and an endless cycle of payments, but I continued to move forward, hoping that a better future would come someday. My mother, Jessica, initially looked at my efforts as a matter of course, but as time went on, she began to show dissatisfaction with my behavior. Her discontent and disappointment added even more internal pressure and fear of the future. My family began to split into two camps. Some supported me and my efforts to pay off my mother's debts, while others considered it ridiculous and unnecessary. The most acute conflict arose with my brother, Mark. Mark was convinced that I was mistaken, and accused me of doing all this for the sake of a future inheritance. He claimed that Mom would do everything possible to ensure a good future for us, and did not understand why I took on this responsibility so decisively. Our arguments were getting hotter and sharper. Every time we started a discussion, it led to loud scandals and tears. Mark called me Mom's idealized daughter and said that I was losing my head because of debts, which, in his opinion, were unimportant. These conflicts brought additional tension in our family, and it was painful for me to see how we diverged on different sides of the barricades. From time to time, I wondered if I had made a mistake by taking on this heavy responsibility. But deep inside me burned the confidence that I was making the right decision, despite all the difficulties that it brought with it. Over time, Mark began to avoid talking about our family's financial problems. He stopped coming to dinner and began spending more and more time somewhere on the street. I understood that he was disappointed with me and my decision. The mother, Jessica, was also changing. She became increasingly dissatisfied and critical of me. She said that I had forgotten about family values and was mired in work and debt. Unpleasant quarrels began between us, and my fear that we would break ties grew every day. But I continued to pay my debts, despite all the difficulties and conflicts within the family. I believed that my determination and dedication would lead to positive changes. Meanwhile, deep down, I hoped that my efforts would be recognized sooner or later, and that my family would be able to find harmony and close relationships again. My mother, Jessica, and I found ourselves in a hot amaranth quarrel. All the accumulated grievances and disagreements broke out. She accused me of being an ungrateful daughter, that I always think only about myself and my work. I, in turn, expressed my resentment about the fact that she hid debts from me and did not share her worries. The argument escalated to the limit, and eventually Jessica invited me to leave the house. That word leave sounded like a lightning bolt to me. I packed up my things and left the house I grew up in. The decision to leave was undoubtedly difficult, but for me, it was a step towards a new life in which I could take control of my destiny and continue paying off debts. The first weeks after I left my parents' house were the most difficult. I rented a small apartment in a new city, where I didn't know anyone, and where I had to start everything from scratch. However, despite the difficulties, I resolutely moved forward. Paying off my debts remained my monthly priority, and I wasn't going to back down. Working intensively, I advanced in my career and increased my income to pay off debts as quickly as possible. This was my main goal, and I persevered towards it. However, loneliness was a heavy burden. Despite this, I continued to build my new life. I made new friendships, and they helped me feel less lonely. From time to time, meetings with new people and interesting events in the city helped to distract from heavy thoughts and restore balance. As time passed, my family began to realize what sacrifices I was making to pay off my mother's debts. They saw how I fought for my independence and financial stability. My brother, Mark, especially began to realize that my actions were not directed against the family, but, on the contrary, for the benefit of it. One day, Mark came up to me with an apology and admitted that he underestimated my efforts and determination. We started communicating again, and this was the first step towards restoring our relationship. Jessica was coming to an understanding too. She realized that my decisions were difficult and made with love for her and her brother. Our conversations were a slow but necessary process of rebuilding our ties. They tried to approach me with an offer of help, but I was resolute in my decision to continue paying off debts on my own. I felt that I needed to complete the business I had started and achieve financial independence in order to feel truly confident in the future. Thus, slowly but surely, our relationship began to recover. We learned to appreciate each other and the importance of family ties, even if we have to go through difficulties and conflicts. My life had become much more complicated, but I wasn't going to give up. Every day brought new challenges, and I accepted them with open hands. Work took up most of my time. I worked late, trying to win this fight. Every extra penny was used to pay off debts. But in addition to financial difficulties, I began to build new friendships. My new friends were my support. They helped me not to feel as lonely as at the beginning of my journey. And finally, I found a new love. Max was a support and inspiration for me. Our relationship was based on mutual understanding and respect, and together we moved forward, building our own family. Month after month, I continued to pay my mother's debts, but without any sense of obligation or expectation of inheritance. My family, watching my efforts from afar, began to be proud of my achievements. My family began to understand that they should respect my decision and give me space. They began to support me from afar, watching my progress and being proud of my achievements. My friends and partner Max were by my side during this period. They helped me get through difficult moments and find inner peace. I continued my life in a new city, built a career and developed new friendships. In this process, I learned to forgive and understand that family ties are valuable, regardless of obstacles and conflicts in the past. It would seem that Mark began to understand my decisions better and even came to me with apologies for his previous words. But it soon became apparent that his position had changed somewhat under the influence of our mother, Jessica. One day, when Mark and I ran into each other again in a conversation about my determination to pay off debts, he suddenly expressed doubt that it was really necessary. "Mom will soon be able to handle this on her own," he said, as if repeating her words. I was amazed at how quickly his point of view changed. It seemed that Jessica's influence on him was incredibly strong. Mark no longer supported me in my efforts and even began to criticize me for being too stubborn to help. It was a disappointing turn of events. I began to realize that even if my relatives outwardly changed their attitude, under the influence of various factors, their opinions will always fluctuate. And yet, I wasn't going to let it ruin my aspirations and goals. Within a few months of my leaving home, the condition of my mother, Jessica, began to deteriorate. Apparently, the stress associated with financial difficulties and family conflicts had a serious impact on her health. I found out about her condition through mutual friends and relatives. They told me that she became weak, often nervous, and could not sleep at night. This news undoubtedly caused me anxiety and guilt. Even though I left her wing, I always remained her daughter, and seeing her get worse was painful for me. Despite all the disagreements and conflicts, I have always cared about her well-being. My family also began to worry about my mother's health and began to look for ways to help her. This situation led to new discussions and attempts to restore family ties, but this time, the goal was not to discuss debts, but to provide help and support for her recovery. Over time, Mark became increasingly concerned about the condition of his mother, Jessica. He told me that doctors do not give positive prognoses and that her condition worsens from day to day. The news of her illness came to all of our family like a lightning strike, and we were faced with a difficult choice. Mark came to me with an offer that shocked me. He said he would insist that the house we lived in go into his inheritance to provide financial support for Mom. This offer was unexpected and caused me a lot of questions and doubts. I felt that the house was part of my past and was connected to the very debts that I had been struggling to pay off all these years. But Mark claimed that this was the only way to provide Mom with the necessary support in this situation. Our discussions became increasingly tense, and emotions were raging inside me. I understood that Mark was acting with the best of intentions, but this decision jeopardized my own efforts and goals. My decision not to claim the house after Mark's proposal caused misunderstanding and tension between us. He claimed that it was just manipulation and bluff on my part, and that I was still expecting an inheritance from my mother. All this was far from the truth. I really didn't want the house as an inheritance, and my main goal was to support my mother and provide her with the necessary help during a difficult period of illness. But Mark couldn't or wouldn't understand my real intentions. Every day our differences deepened. We had endless arguments and could not find a common language. My attempts to explain my position were met with discontent and distrust. Mark didn't want to take responsibility for his mother's financial support, even in this critical situation. This caused me to doubt his real motives. It began to seem to me that he was really waiting for an inheritance and interacted with his mother more because of financial interests than because of caring for her. 1.5 months after the deterioration of the mother's condition, she passed away. Her passing has left a deep void in the hearts of each of us. All the disagreements and conflicts seemed small and insignificant in comparison with the loss of his mother. At first, after her death, we all found ourselves in a state of shock and grief. It was a time of grief and condolences, and we decided not to burden each other with our previous disagreements. With the gradual recovery, the procedures for the division of property began. The house we lived in was the center of attention. The family meeting was emotional and tense, as each of us was striving to take the house. I decided that the house didn't really matter to me. My priorities have changed, and I just wanted the process of dividing the property to go quickly and without unnecessary conflicts. I offered Mark to take the house, as he was insistent in his desire. Mark agreed, and this decision brought relief to our family. After the division of property and the death of my mother, I felt a bitter disappointment in Mark. All those accusations and suspicions that I was chasing the inheritance turned out to be only a shadow of his own unsuccessful decisions and actions. I found out that he really did not provide financial assistance to his mother, despite her illness. He preferred to spend his time playing games and judging me for my selfless help to her. This disappointment was huge and painful. I realized that this whole inheritance dispute was just a reflection of his own complexes and ambitions. He couldn't accept the fact that I was willing to give up the house for our mother and help her in a difficult time. His own indifference and inattention to his mother's needs were the bitter truth. This disappointment in Mark was a lesson for me that family ties do not always mean support and mutual understanding. Sometimes we have to face disappointments and realize that people may not be what we saw them.